June 18th, 1815. Rain-soaked fields near a small Belgian village. Two of the greatest military minds in history, Napoleon Bonaparte and the Duke of Wellington, are about to clash in a battle that will decide the fate of Europe for the next century. This is the story of Waterloo, Napoleon's final epic gamble. But how did it all come to this? How did an emperor, exiled just a year earlier, find himself once again at the head of a French army, ready to risk everything on a single day's fight? Stick with me, because we're about to break down one of the most famous and consequential battles in all of history. To truly understand Waterloo, we have to rewind a bit. In 1814, after a disastrous invasion of Russia and a series of defeats, Napoleon was forced to abdicate and was exiled to the tiny island of Elba. The old monarchies of Europe breathed a sigh of relief, but they underestimated the emperor's ambition. In February 1815, Napoleon escaped Elba, landed in France, and began a march to Paris. The troops sent to arrest him, veterans who had fought and bled under his command, flocked to his banner instead. King Louis XVIII fled, and in a period known as the 100 Days, Napoleon was emperor once more. Europe was terrified. The great powers, Britain, Prussia, Austria, and Russia, immediately declared war, not on France, but on Napoleon himself. They formed the Seventh Coalition and began to mobilize massive armies to crush him once and for all. Napoleon knew he was outnumbered. His only chance was to strike first and defeat the coalition armies one by one before they could unite. His primary targets were the two armies closest to France, the Anglo-Allied army under the Duke of Wellington and the Prussian army under the fiery Field Marshal Gebhard von Blücher. Napoleon's plan was classic Napoleon: use speed and surprise to drive a wedge between the two Allied armies, preventing them from supporting each other. He would then use his main force to destroy each army in turn. On June 15th, he crossed the border into what is now Belgium, catching the Allies off guard. On June 16th, two major battles took place simultaneously: the Battle of Ligny and the Battle of Quatre. At Ligny, Napoleon himself led the main French force and dealt a heavy blow to Blücher's Prussians, forcing them to retreat. It was a victory, but not a decisive one. The Prussians weren't destroyed, they were just pushed back. Meanwhile, at the crossroads of Quatre, a smaller French force under Marshal Ney engaged Wellington's army. Ney's orders were to seize the crossroads, which would have prevented Wellington from helping the Prussians. But Ney hesitated, and Wellington's troops put up a fierce defense. By the end of the day, the French had failed to take the crossroads. While Napoleon had successfully separated the two Allied armies for the moment, he hadn't landed the knockout punch he needed. This set the stage for the main event 2 days later. After the Battle of Ligny, Napoleon made a critical assumption. He believed the defeated Prussians were retreating east, away from Wellington. He dispatched a third of his army, about 33,000 men under Marshal Grouchy, to chase them and make sure they couldn't rejoin the fight. This decision would prove to be a catastrophic mistake. In reality, the tough old Blücher, despite being wounded, was determined to keep his promise to Wellington. He ordered his army not to retreat east, but to retreat north, parallel to Wellington's army, so they could still come to his aid. Meanwhile, Wellington, hearing of the Prussian defeat at Ligny, knew he couldn't hold his position at Quatre alone. He conducted a skillful retreat north to a pre-scouted defensive position he believed was perfect for a battle: a low ridge just south of the village of Waterloo. The ridge offered a reverse slope, which meant he could hide the bulk of his troops from French artillery fire, only exposing them at the last moment. He also garrisoned 3 key strategic farmhouses in front of his main line: Hougoumont on his right flank, La Haye Sainte in the center, and Papelotte on his left. These fortified farms would act as crucial breakwaters against the French advance. The night of June 17th saw torrential rain, turning the battlefield into a sea of mud. This delayed the start of the battle on the 18th, giving the Prussians precious extra time to march. Finally, around 11:30 a.m. on Sunday, June 18th, the battle began. Napoleon opened with a diversionary attack on the chateau of Hougoumont on Wellington's right flank. What was meant to be a small attack to draw in Wellington, his reserves quickly escalated into a brutal, all-day battle within a battle. The elite French soldiers of Prince Jérôme's division threw themselves against the farm's walls, but the stubborn defense by British, German and Nassau troops held firm. This fight at Hougoumont sucked in more and more French troops throughout the day, troops that Napoleon desperately needed elsewhere. With the fight for Hougoumont raging, Napoleon prepared his main assault. Around 1:30 p.m., a massive French artillery bombardment, the Grand Battery, opened fire on Wellington's centre. The goal was to soften up the Allied line before a huge infantry assault. But Wellington's genius reverse slope defence paid off. Most of his infantry were sheltered behind the ridge, and the wet ground absorbed much of the cannonball's impact. Following the bombardment, 18,000 French infantry under Marshal d'Erlon advanced in a massive column. As they crested the ridge, they were met by a devastating surprise. General Picton's British infantry, who had been lying down behind the ridge, stood up and delivered a point-blank volley. Then, the British heavy cavalry, the Household and Union brigades, charged downhill, smashing into the French columns and sending them reeling back in chaos. The charge was heroic, but the British cavalry, in their excitement, went too far and were counterattacked and cut to pieces by French lancers. Both sides had suffered heavily, but Wellington's centre had held. By mid-afternoon, Napoleon's situation was becoming increasingly desperate. He could see the first signs of dark blue uniforms on the horizon to the east. It was the Prussians. His gamble was failing. Grouchy hadn't stopped them. He needed to break Wellington's line, and he needed to do it now. A series of massive, uncoordinated French cavalry charges were launched against the Allied centre-right. For hours, thousands of France's finest horsemen, led by the legendary Marshal Ney, threw themselves against the Allied infantry. Wellington's troops formed infantry squares, hollow boxes of men, bristling with bayonets, which were almost impenetrable to cavalry. The French horsemen swirled around the squares, unable to break them, taking terrible losses from artillery and musket fire. Ney displayed incredible bravery, having 5 horses shot from under him, but it was all in vain. The cavalry attacks failed to break the Allied line. While the cavalry charges were failing, the French did manage one crucial success. In the centre, they finally captured the farmhouse of La Haye Sainte after the defending German soldiers ran out of ammunition. This was a major crisis for Wellington. The French now had a strong point in the middle of his line, from which they could pour devastating fire into his battered centre. Wellington's line was stretched to the breaking point. Famously, he was heard to say, "Night, or the Prussians must come." And come they did. By late afternoon, Blücher's IV Corps was starting to engage Napoleon's right flank, forcing the Emperor to commit his precious reserves to hold them back. The sun was setting. It was now or never for Napoleon. He committed his last best troops, the legendary Imperial Guard. These were the elite veterans of the French army, who had never known defeat. They marched forward in a final desperate attempt to shatter Wellington's weakened centre. As the imposing figures of the Guard advanced up the ridge, Wellington rode to his own Guards brigade and gave the order, "Now, Maitland, now's your time." Over 1,500 British foot guards, who had been lying down, rose up as one and fired a catastrophic volley at point-blank range. The unthinkable happened. The Imperial Guard faltered. They stopped. Then, they broke and ran. The cry went up all along the French line, "La Garde, recule! The Guard is retreating!" At that moment, Wellington galloped to the crest of the ridge, waved his hat in the air, signalling a general advance. The entire Allied line surged forward. Simultaneously, the Prussians finally broke through on Napoleon's right flank. The French army, attacked from 2 sides and seeing its legendary Guard broken, dissolved into a panicked rout. The battle was over. Napoleon's empire had crumbled in a single afternoon. The Battle of Waterloo was a bloody affair, with combined casualties estimated at over 50,000 men. For Napoleon, it was the end. He fled the field and abdicated for a second and final time a few days later. This time, the Allies took no chances. They exiled him to the remote, windswept island of St. Helena in the middle of the Atlantic, where he would die 6 years later. The 100 Days were over, and the Napoleonic Wars, which had ravaged Europe for over a decade, were finally at an end. The battle ushered in a long period of relative peace in Europe, often called the Pax Britannica, as Britain emerged as the world's dominant power. Waterloo wasn't just a battle, it was the closing chapter of an entire era and the dramatic final act in the incredible life of Napoleon Bonaparte. And that is the story of Waterloo, from the daring escape from Elba to the final desperate charge of the Imperial Guard. It's a tale of strategy, courage, costly mistakes, and how the fate of a continent can turn on a single rain-soaked day. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this deep dive into history, please give this video a like and consider subscribing to the channel for more. Let me know in the comments what other historical battles you'd like to see explained. Until next time,